Oh, Kirsten, can you tell me if it's being recorded? Yeah, does it work? Okay, good, good. So what I would like to do is share my screen for a minute. Could you please all close your eyes because my desktop is in such a horrible state. There we go. Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you all. I'm Marie Hedon, and I want to thank you all for joining us for this session, the first session of our CIVIS seminar. Um, um, it Before we start, I'd like to introduce this seminar to you because it marks the kickoff of a project that we've decided to set up within this European Research Alliance called CIVIS, which are three universities, so Glasgow, Lausanne, and Aix-Marseille are members of. So when we decided to set up this project, we gave ourselves a broad theme, which we entitled "What Past Have We Now?" Because we wanted to have a closer look at the great transformations of the relation between memory, identity, and literature in the 21st century. So this project, it's a project which starts from this huge diversity of writing to come out of Scotland in the past 20 years, and its impact on the notion of identity and how it has changed and how it has come to be understood as and defined, actually. So we thought that there were new writers, new themes that came out in the 21st century, new literary forms as well, or literary forms that came to the forefront, such as film poems and that kind of literature, which and also the increased internationalization of Scottish cultural production, which is the starting point for today's session. So our goal is to work on those important paradigmatic shifts this brings to this age-old nation of national identity in a Scottish context, in a way that tries to make sense of its both multifaceted and outward-looking aspects. So, in practical terms, this is a project which involves a series of webinars organized by each of the partner universities in turn, represented by Corey Gibson for Glasgow University, Kirsten Stirling, the University of Lausanne, and myself for Aix-Marseille University. So we'll take it in turns to host seminars, and there's going to be a series of seminars, which will be followed by, in the third year, by an international conference, which will be organized on the strength of the work that we've done in those seminars. So they're thematic. We've got a topic for each year as well under the general heading of What Past Have We Now? And we've also, from a practical point of view, we've decided to try and experiment with a very short format, a 1 hour webinar, because we think that it would help everyone to make the time to attend. So this year, which is, the first seminar being this one, we entitled The Political Horizon of Devolution. It's hosted, our first seminar is hosted at Aix-Marseille University, but, this is a very theoretical concept when you talk about a seminar that takes place on Zoom, but, the first, and the first session of which welcomes two speakers who are actually in Glasgow. So, it's very theoretical. But we wanted to start the series of events with Alasdair Gray. We thought it was a fit starting point for our seminars. And when we look at the evolution of Scottish literature, our two speakers have been kind enough to accept our invitation to speak about Gray, and more particularly about Poor Things. So I'm very happy to welcome Sorcha Dallas, the custodian of the Alasdair Gray Archive, and Lauren Forde, a PhD student at Strathclyde University and the Alasdair Gray Archive. They'll be talking to us about revisiting Poor Things from an archival point of view. Sorcha will give us an introduction into the Alasdair Gray Archive and discuss Poor Things and its digital guide. And then Lauren will discuss her work on this book as part of her CDA. Before I hand over to you, Sorcha and Lauren, I just wanted to announce our spring seminar, which will take place in Glasgow in March, the 27th of March, which we titled Indie Ref and Scottish Literature. It will be chaired by Corey Gibson, and it will pick up from a recent roundtable at the Nottingham World Congress of Scottish Literatures, which addressed the devolutionary and post-devolutionary period. And this is a seminar which will interrogate the usefulness of referenda as markers in literary history, but that's for our second seminar. For now and for today, I'm happy to hand over to our first speaker today, and thank you again, Sorcha Dallas. Just going to have to unshare my screen, Sorcha, so that you can share yours. I think it should be all right now.
Great. Is that working now?
Yes, it is. I can see it.
Great. Thank you so much to Marie and to Kirsten and Corey for inviting myself and Lauren this evening to speak to you about Poor Things. So I'm going to do a bit of a slight meandering preamble into talking about Poor Things in the digital guide, so bear with me. But to start off, when Alasdair Gray died in 2019, his work was in danger of being divided up and disappeared. The Alasdair Gray Archive was set up to prevent this from happening, to honour his wish in the right to access culture for all and to fix it in the city to which it's inextricably linked. Gray's entire creative practice, expansive across the visual and literary, was concerned with fixing marginalised and overlooked histories, rooting them within a continuum of making that he exposed as part of the practice. So think here about the list of plagiarisms within Lanark or the notes historical and critical within Poor Things. AGA is an interdisciplinary arts and heritage organisation with public engagement and creative commissioning at its core, and our socially conscious model of making uses Alasdair's own approach as a methodology for creating new work. Our Poor Things, a novel guide digital resource is an example of this, but first, and in good Gray fashion, a meandering preamble as to why. Oh, let me see. So I'm trying to move between. Apologies, it's not allowing me to. Oh, there we go. 1 second. Okay, sorry. Okay, so the writer Liz Lockhead described Gray's relation to Glasgow as him being a poet of this city in prose and painting, like Dickens with London. He was a painterly writer, a literary artist in residence who claimed the right to live in the present whilst in dialogue with the past. His work was expansive and visionary, often extending into the city itself through civically cited murals, but the modest conditions in which they were produced were always domestic, often borrowed and temporary. By 1991, he was frequently using in his books the epigram, "Work as if you live in the early days of a better nation," with this phrase quickly becoming adopted as the slogan for Scottish opposition to Thatcherism. In 2004, this text was engraved in the newly opened Scottish Parliament building in Edinburgh on the Canongate Wall. It was referred to by SNP politicians during the 2007 Scottish Parliament election campaign when they became a minority government for the first time. And if you look closely at this photograph that we have on display here, which is also at the archive by Alan Wiley, you can see Gray's earliest version of it scrawled across his bedroom wall in 1983. Gray attributes its origin to the Canadian poet Dennis Lee, showing his approach to making being rooted in the practice of others. It could also be claimed that this motto serves as a call to action for the intrepid Victoria McCandless from Poor Things, who in the same year as becoming Scotland's first women graduate of medicine, opens the Godwin Baxter Natal Clinic for working class women and children in Cowcaddens. The press scoff at the Bolshevik doctor, but her commitment to fairness for all remains until her death. Her last known letter, addressed to the Scottish poet Hugh MacDiarmid, expresses hope for a socialist future that, as we know, does not come to pass. This belief to be and do better through even economic distribution was how Gray lived his life and the conditions in which he made his work. His home was always a hive of industry, with secretaries and assistants being paid the same rate as pay as himself, £15 per hour, with any leftover money being donated to charity at Gray's resistance to acquiring and accruing financial wealth. Gray's temporary accommodation changed to one more permanent in the late 1980s when he met his second wife, Morag McAlpine, and moved into her home, with Gray describing it as being the most comfortable and stable he'd ever had. It is this room from the home that they shared that we have reinstated at the archive, although many of the items within it travelled with Alasdair from previous places. This fixing of Gray's studio within the archive and city mirrors his approach to highlighting overlooked and marginalised histories. Meeting McAlpine corresponded with Gray starting to work on Poor Things, with Morag being instrumental in providing the stable conditions in which the book was made and contributing towards its creation. So the archive is a reinstatement of the environment in which this novel was created, with Morag being the person to whom the book is dedicated. Morag drew the tear-stained letters from Bella, which feature in the novel. They were created through Gray apparently flicking water at her while she wrote in her best handwriting, with her apparently growing increasingly frustrated and stopping sooner than Gray had planned. Morag also posed with the figure of Bella or Victoria emerging from the skull on the internal page, despite the text claiming the illustration was created not by Gray, but by the Scottish painter and printmaker William Strang. Fixing these stories and oral histories around Morag and others is a key part of what we've been working on at the archive through reorganising the collection, dedicating boxes, which you can see here, to individuals and commissioning new biographies as introductory guides. These boxes show the web of influence and support around Alasdair and record the histories of individuals that might otherwise have been lost. Through this, we can consider an archive moving past this idea of a singular artist, but using them as a pivot in a map made of others. This is what Alasdair's life was like. We believe his legacy should reflect this. We also acknowledge the ambiguities in creating biographies and the role subjectivity plays in telling a more complex version of people's lives. I mentioned the Cowcaddens area where Gray situates the natal clinic, claiming it was opened and managed by Victoria McCandless in 1890. This area also features in one of Gray's most notable artworks seen here, Cowcaddens Streetscape in the 50s from 1964, which you might have spotted propped on an easel in his bedroom on the previous couple of slides. This painting was Gray's attempt at using his art as an act of preservation to map and record a city going through a seismic shift in the early 1960s due to the motorway redevelopment. This area is one in which Gray lived and worked, with a gable-end studio and sitting room containing one of his mural artworks. Sadly, this flat was condemned and subsequently destroyed, and the mural, like many others Gray made, lost forever to local law. Living through this period, Alasdair was witnessing firsthand the destruction of civic history around him and was growing increasingly frustrated in how poorly it was being recorded before it was being lost. His attempts to fix it chimes with the good work that many others were doing at the time in preserving endangered local histories, most notably Gray's good friends Elspeth King and Michael Donnelly. In fact, in Poor Things, Gray claims to merely be its editor, after Donnelly, a local historian, discovered the original memoir transcripts from 1909 of Dr. Archibald McCandless, passing them on to Gray to edit. All Gray claims to have done to enhance the work further was to compile historical notes and attach a letter from the deceased doctor's late wife, Victoria McCandless, refuting the entire contents of her husband's book, which, if we come to learn anything about Alasdair Gray, we know might not necessarily be the whole story. And that's not the full story on Cowcaddens either. If you look to the right-hand corner of the undulating cityscape that we've seen previously, we see three figures walking down a road behind it, which is a view of a cobbled street, a small bridge with a soot-stained house and a series of industrial buildings stacked behind. Incredibly, this is a view of Applecross, where the archive is located, and the building in which we are housed, an old Whisky Bond warehouse, features in this artwork and is the last remaining industrial building from that time. The ledger we have on proud display on Gray's desk maps the evolution of this artwork and shows how Gray was drawing and photographing this part of the city in which the archive is located. In fact, the page that you can see now showing the panoramic photographs of Glasgow features our building and the small bridge over the canal and the small house, which are the only three noticeable features from that time that feature within the Cowcaddens painting that still remain. And that's the enduring legacy of Alasdair Gray's work, to make us notice the civic and political changes that have happened in the city and beyond, and to prompt us to question why and who was most impacted by their disappearance. The roots of all Gray's work lies in the practice of others, and it could be claimed that nothing he ever made was started from a blank page. And this ledger that we proudly have housed in the archive is a literal example of this. as dotted throughout are entries made from the accountancy firm that had previously owned it in the early 1960s. Gray takes it into his home in 1963, not erasing what was there already, but using it as a guide to draw and annotate around. Alasdair found the ledger in a skip, and it's an example of how his proactive way of noticing extends beyond the civic and political histories he was recording to the very materials themselves. What others considered worth discarding Gray's value, reanimating them through incorporation into his work. This approach is constant throughout his entire working life, and in the archive we have evidence of this, from sketches being made on old correspondence to paintings being formed on recycled tabletops and cupboard doors. This was all prompted by economics. His commitment to living and working in a socialist bubble in a wider capitalist world meant that having a disposable income to spend on materials was often rare. So this old discarded ledger is now one of our most prized possessions in showing how important the social and political history of the city was to the formation of Gray's work. But alongside his scrapbook drawings and photographs are also descriptive elements of Glasgow. This fusing of words and pictures to tell stories more fully is what Gray strove for throughout his life, and several of these text entries are in fact key passages from his most celebrated novel, Lanark. Gray is considered the first writer to have explored the imaginative potential of what Glasgow could hold, with his hopes of visioning alternative versions for the city, having a direct impact on the creative lives of its inhabitants. And this much quoted section of from page 243 of Lanark is often used to describe that point. But if you go a few lines before this famous quote, we see Thom McAlpine, and they're noted walking up a cobbled street over a wooden bridge to a viewpoint over the city. And incredibly, this is the very same bridge and viewpoint at Applecross, which features in Candons. And this page from the ledger shows the view that Alasdair Gray sketched from that viewpoint that inspired these famous lines, proving again the inexplicable link between Gray and Glasgow. And now my own protracted preamble brings me here and to why we wanted to create Poor Things, a novel guide. Our interactive guide to Gray's seminal novel. As we all know, there was an Oscar-winning movie of the same name that was received a critical acclaim earlier this year. Once we knew the film had erased all connections to Glasgow, we felt very strongly about reinstating them through this guide, as recording the disappearance of the city was vital to Gray's work, and it was critical to the formation of the novel too. There's a great deal of ambiguous truth-telling in Poor Things and many conflicting narratives. Our Poor Things novel guide explores these contradictions and unmasks the city, people, places and politics of the novel, which make it so distinctly Gray and a uniquely Glasgow story. Digital has always been really crucial to proving the value of our collection and to why Gray's work matters beyond Glasgow. It was essential at the start for us as a way of connecting and building a community in the midst of the global pandemic, and it continues to be a crucial part of our programme. We are a very small charity who don't receive core funding, so with the limited funds that we had, we decided on rooting the novel back into Glasgow's rich social and political history, and importantly, asking lots of other people to help us create it. Making the case for why Gray's work matters and proving the value of our collection through working with others has been a really key point since inception. So from that, what we have started to do is develop this creative ecosystem, which is a model by which we drive engagement with our collection and all of Gray's work under these three headers of public engagement, creative commissioning and education. And through embedding Gray's ethical framework within the organisation, we have tried to create a model that reflects his own approach to making as a socially focused action. Part of the key ways that we've been doing that is to make the archive generative and a living resource that is constantly being expanded by others' engagement with it. And a good example of that is our Creative Commission series. So these series offer a unique and supportive environment for other creatives to come in and explore the cultural potential of their work in response to our collection. And for these commissions, we invite creative practitioners to respond to some element of Gray's work, practice or approach, and to explore that and create something new that is meaningfully connected to it, but also exists as a new work on its own and very much in reflection of his own approach to making too. Throughout his life, Alasdair sought to declare and celebrate his influences, seeing them as an integral part of all making, and similarly, we try and encourage creatives to do the same. And this is something we've been working in partnership from since inception with partners including creative writing at the University of Strathclyde and Gutter magazine, and we're about to work on 3 new comedic interpretations to Alasdair's work with the Glasgow International Comedy Festival. And one of the big ways that we celebrate the outcomes from that work is through our annual Grey Day, which is a bit of a riff on the Bloomsday, where we celebrate Alasdair's work more widely under the auditorium mural, his masterwork, Sistine Chapel in the West End of Glasgow. A key way to ensure the stories that we hold at the archive are also shared more widely is through education. And you'll be hearing shortly from one of our Scottish Graduate School for Arts and Humanities funded collaborative doctoral award students, Lauren Forde, and her ongoing research. We've been sharing her work, though, as it progresses and develops through in-person workshops, from online talks, and also Lauren helped contribute towards a user's guide for Clive Haddon's that we use for our portable education resource called the Travelling Archive too. So this dissemination of the research as it develops has been a key part of what we've been working on with her too. So in conclusion, I guess so much of Alasdair's work was concerned with fixing disappearing histories and making the case for the archive to exist and be supported has been the same too and remains ongoing. Building a legacy in real time has given us a real insight into what cultural stories are being supported and told, and how culture is political. As Alasdair had said, people who care nothing for their country's stories and songs are like people without a past, without a memory. They're half people. And we believe investing in these cultural stories is key, and we remain hopeful about the potential to grow them and benefit the public, celebrate community, and unlock our collective imagination. So this hopefulness to do better and be better through culture and working together is really at the heart of everything Alasdair made, and is at the heart of everything that we're striving to do in his name too. So I'll stop there and hand back to Marie. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sorcha, for this, for telling us about all the important work that's being done at the Alasdair Gray Archive, and also underline this particular connection between Poor Things and Glasgow, and you know, it's a case in point of what happened in the film, as you explained to us in your very briefly in your presentation. I'd like to. We're going to take questions. If you have questions for Sorcha, of course, don't hesitate to put them. You can put them in the chat. Kirsten and I will be looking at them and then putting them back to Sorcha at the end when we've got this little time for questions. But we thought that it would be better for us to listen to Lauren first, and then we can take all your questions together. So now it's over to you, Lauren.
Hello, can you see my screen?
Yes, great. Yes, we can see it.
Okay, so hi, my name is Lauren Forde. I always, for some reason, write my own name just to remind me to say it or to not forget it in my talk notes. As Sorcha said, I'm a SAGSA-funded researcher. I'm doing a collaborative doctoral award with the University of Strathclyde and the Alasdair Gray Archive, and my thesis is exploring Alasdair Gray's portrayal of Glasgow as a disappearing city. And today, I'll be sharing my research on Poor Things, exploring the transformation of Victoria Hattersley to Bella Baxter as an allegory for Glasgow's transformation from an industrial city to European City of Culture in 1990. For those unfamiliar with Alasdair Gray, he often described himself as a fat, spectacled, balding, increasingly old Glasgow pedestrian. It's a classically Scottish self-depiction, but Alasdair was, of course, so much more than this. He was a working-class Scottish polymath, and with over 65 years of output, Gray turned Glasgow into a city of the imagination by harnessing a specific technique using words and paint to create a kaleidoscopic view of what he considered Glasgow to be, a disappearing city. In the Alasdair Gray Archive, as Sorcha has discussed, there's evidence of Gray's devotion to Glasgow, which we can see in his ledger from the 1950s, which he found in a skip and repurposed as a civic history book, containing sketches, photographs, newspaper clippings, and diary entries documenting the Kirkcaldy's era in Glasgow before much of it was demolished to create the Inner Ring Road, a new motorway through Glasgow. The ledger is arguably the genesis of one of Gray's most prolific paintings called Kirkcaldy Streetscape in the 50s, which you can now see in Kelvingrove Art Gallery and Museum. And the painting captures a panoramic, surrealist view of Kirkcaldy's pre-motorway, ultimately preserving a view of the area that now no longer exists. There's one entry in the ledger which outlines the fragility Gray saw in Glasgow and the power he found in his practice. He wrote, "Oh, when I consider the litter of ideas and writings, doodles and deliberate sketches, fragments of verse and prose I accumulate as I live, they seem not to be an assortment of activities, but part of a single effort to redeem experience totally. For the tiniest fragment from years back may become the seed of a new picture or provide the only detail which will complete a poem or give exactness to a scene. I have the power and the patience to reconstruct my own lost civilization from the scraps in my middens. I want my art to use all my life, make all of it significant, redeem it completely." This line allows us to see Glasgow through Gray's eyes as a field of inspiration where his sketches and writing can become seeds to grow new works that reconstruct Glasgow, what Gray would describe as his disappearing city or his lost civilization. But has Glasgow disappeared? We've still got the Clyde, a north, south, east and west. We've still got museums and art galleries, libraries and parks, and a huge People Make Glasgow sign, which aims to endorse the power of Glasgow's people in defining the city's identity. The Glasgow of the past and the Glasgow of the future may seem like two different places, but they are both still Glasgow. The city hasn't disappeared. It's changed, adapted, evolved, and transformed into a different version of itself, but in many ways it remains the same. Arguably, its perception of the transforming city, the longing for a time which has passed, which made Gray view Glasgow as a place that had disappeared. But if it truly is the people who make Glasgow, then what can they tell us about how Glasgow has transformed? For those unfamiliar with the novel, Poor Things is a Victorian Gothic pastiche made up of 3 sections which offer 2 opposing accounts of one woman's origins. The novel begins with an introduction written by the fictional editor who is curiously named Alasdair Gray, where we learn that the main body of the novel is a Victorian memoir written by Archibald McCandless. In Archibald McCandless's account, he tells the story of a pregnant woman who attempts to end her own life by jumping into the Clyde. Her body is rescued and she is resurrected by a Glaswegian scientist called Godwin Baxter, who replaces her own brain with that of her unborn child's. And this Frankenstein-esque creation, made up of baby's brain and adult body, becomes known as Bella Baxter, who starts her life again with a new identity psychologically, but carrying this new identity is her old body with the physical memory of her past. The second account is told through a letter from Victoria McCandless, who claims the real identity of Bella Baxter and refutes all the fantastical elements told in Archibald's memoir, offering a kind of lifelike tale on the events that led her to the scientist Godwin Baxter. Today, I'll be focusing on Archibald's account of Victoria Hattersley's transformation into Bella Baxter, and what I'm interested in is exploring the ways in which we can view this as an allegory for Glasgow's transformation from an industrial city to European city of culture. So why am I doing this? Well, Kirsten Stirling led the way in exploring Bella Caledonia as a national representation of Scotland and an avenue to explore the disparity between Scottish and British identity. Bella Caledonia can be understood as a visual depiction of Bella Baxter in the novel. In Stirling's assertion, you have the brain, the psychological identity, as feeling Scottish, although the physical body representing this identity is the British government. I aim to invert Stirling's framework. Rather than using the national Bella Caledonia as a national representation of Scotland, I will instead use the local Bella Baxter as a representation of the local city, Glasgow. I'm interested in the duality of Bella Baxter, a sort of hybrid creation made up of body and mind, mother and child, past and present. Like Stirling, I've decided to divide Bella into 2, where I will view the body as belonging to Victoria and representing Glasgow's industrial past, and the brain to Bella Baxter, representing the city's new cultural identity of 1990. And in the novel, transformation is everywhere. As Bella Baxter explains, movement turns dead dogs into maggots and daisies, and flour, butter, sugar, an egg, and a tablespoonful of milk into Abernethy biscuits. And movement causes pain when solid bodies knock into living ones, or living ones knock each other. So to stop us getting knocked dead before life wears us out, we have generated, developed, evolved, acquired, invented, matured, gained, and grown eyes and brains to let us see knocks coming and dodge them, and how beautifully the whole godly clamjamfrey works. That is a real mouthful. Before I delve into the allegory of the novel, I'm going to give a brief overview of how Glasgow's identity transformed between the 19th and 20th century. In the 19th century, Glasgow forged its identity as an industrial powerhouse with a significant working class population. Following World War I, Glasgow's industries fell into prolonged decline, and although this picked up slightly during World War II to aid the war effort, this did not last. With the closure of factories and shipyards, global competition, the creation of new towns outside of Glasgow, the deployment of around 250,000 people out the city, alongside the construction of the motorway through predominantly working class neighbourhoods and the creation of high-rise flats, the city experienced mass unemployment, poor housing and dire social conditions, ultimately forging the negative outward image of a suffering city. Now, that's all pretty dire, but for the working classes in Glasgow, it's important to recognise that this was often the reality of what they lived through. By 1983, Glasgow attempted to rebrand itself and shake off its dirty and dangerous image by launching the Glasgow's Miles Better campaign to change the city's outward image and to encourage people to view Glasgow in a more positive light. Having done the groundwork, by 1986, Glasgow prepared itself for a full transformation, shedding off its industrial past as the city was nominated as the European City of Culture. However, this identity transformation did not come without its backlash, particularly from the Workers' City Group, who formed in 1988 in response to Glasgow's nomination as European City of Culture. The Workers' City Group, which included the like of James Kelman and Alasdair Gray, fought for the working class and workers' view of the city. The workers felt as though Glasgow's new cultural outlook was overshadowing working class history and neglecting the real suffering of poorer folk within Glasgow. I'm going to start by analysing the ways in which we can compare Victoria's mind and body to Glasgow's Victorian industrial past by investigating the real locations that are anchored onto our narrative. Gray's choice to name the character Victoria also suggests this tie between Victoria and the Victorian era. The most crucial of these locations is the Clyde, where Victoria ends her life. By fusing Victoria's death to a river so bound with the city's industrial success, the real Glasgow comes back into view. Further, when Victoria jumps into the Clyde, Godwin states, "She did not jump feet first like most suicides. She dived clean under like a swimmer, but expelling the air from her lungs, not drawing it in, for she did not return to the surface alive." We could compare Victoria's last breaths here, expelling the air from her lungs, as perhaps the last bellows of smoke leaving Glasgow's chimneys during the city's prolonged deindustrialisation. Diaz-Martinez notes that the Victorian Glasgow we see in Poor Things recovers images of Glasgow's invisible past and reclaims lost ideals of previous eras. The idea of Glasgow's invisible past is akin to Gray's lost civilization. Although Glasgow still contains the physical legacy of the Clyde, its function has changed since the Victorian era. By tying Victoria's death to the Clyde, we see the Victorian legacy of Glasgow's physical city, like Victoria's body, is not lost but transformed. As Victoria's brain is replaced with that of her unborn child's, only Victoria's body, her physical legacy, remains. This is portrayed with an unknown scar on her stomach. In the same way, Glasgow too conveys the physical memory of its past, with the River Clyde which physically divides the city in two. In the novel, we see a growing curiosity in Bella surrounding her physical past, which we know is Victoria's body. Duncan Wedderburn makes Bella aware that she has a caesarean scar on her stomach, and Bella writes to Godwin saying, "I had a baby once, God. Is that true?" We can understand Bella's question as, "Where is my creation?" Though the question should perhaps be, "Who created me?" Through Bella asking of her origins without any knowledge of her physical past, she struggles to find harmony between her physical body and her psychological identity, which ultimately creates tension between her past and present self. In Glasgow, the Clyde is an important physical site regarding Glasgow's history and identity. As historian Sidney Checkland asserts, the Clyde reorientated the city in space. From this, we can see how Glasgow's industrial identity is influenced by its physical makeup, and likewise, its physical makeup influences its identity. The Clyde is an enduring symbol of Glasgow's working class culture and an insight into the city's history. However, since the 1980s, it has been moulded to fit commercialism, entertainment, and business. Historian Ralph Richter asserts that industrial heritage sites can act as containers of memory, which provide meaning to the existence of cultural groups and their history, although he states there are very few industrial relics that remain in Glasgow to represent the city's industrial working class history. This transformation of the Clyde has ultimately erased its working class heritage, creating hollows in identity. And in the same way that Victoria's body is left with the scars from her past, Glasgow is left with the physical layout of a city historically built for industry, both permanent physical features with ambiguous historical significance to their present identities, making the Clyde perhaps the city's biggest scar. If Victoria's body can act as a representation of Glasgow's industrial physical past, then Bella can be viewed as an allegory for Glasgow's transformed cultural identity of 1990. Though, if we are comparing Bella to Glasgow's new identity, then we should also consider Godwin's allegorical role as the creator of Bella. In this sense, we can understand Godwin as having a similar role to the Glasgow District Council, who conceived the new Glasgow of 1990. In 1986, Glasgow was selected as the next European City of Culture, which, for several reasons, was met with speculation. Unlike previous winners such as Athens, Amsterdam, and Paris, who were the capital cities of their respective countries and already acknowledged cultural centres, Glasgow was not the capital city of Scotland. It was the first post-industrial city to win the award, and its outward image of violence, poor health, and squalor did not project the Eurocentric images often associated with the Culture Award. In Poor Things, this is mirrored by the recreation of Victoria into Bella. Firstly, Victoria's life was deemed so abysmal that she chose to end it, and Archibald displays scepticism surrounding Godwin's creation of Bella by combining an adult body and an infant brain. Upon learning of her conception, Archibald states, "As I sipped the dark ruby syrup, I suddenly felt that Baxter, his household, Miss Bell, yes, and me, and Glasgow, and rural Galloway, and all Scotland were equally unlikely and absurd." For both the local council and Godwin, Bella and Glasgow's past was something to be ashamed of. We see this in the novel where Godwin tells Archibald that if he had reanimated Victoria, she would be put in a mental hospital or jail. And this is echoed by the local council, who believed Glasgow's past was so deeply entrenched with poverty and poor health that the only way to encourage regeneration was to wipe the slate clean and create a new identity for the city. And this can be seen in their manifesto for 1990, where they wrote, "You can't stand still. You can't rely on the achievements of the past, no matter how impressive these may have been. Glasgow's days as a great industrial city are over. Sad as this may seem, its consequences are clear. Set out to become a great post-industrial city." Further, Godwin's dissection and reconfiguration of Victoria's deceased body reveals an imbalanced power dynamic between class representation and image construction for Glasgow in 1990. For Glasgow's local authorities, the cultural arena was one of the few areas they still retained control over, as the UK's Conservative government restricted much of the local power to Glasgow. The role of Godwin in deciding Victoria's fate mirrors the local council in the reconfiguration of Glasgow's identity in 1990. Further, Godwin's upper-class status illuminates the disparity between the neoliberal business makers and the working classes during 1990. The Workers' City aired their frustration regarding this, suggesting the local council were using enormous amounts of public money to control and redefine Glasgow for an outward audience. The new Glasgow of 1990 was created through image making and reframing the narrative of the city to project a positive outward image. In the novel, Archibald raises this idea that Godwin's experiment has created a surgical fabrication. And this is echoed by the negative feelings of the Workers' City group, who felt that Glasgow of 1990 was sanitising the real working class culture and cultural history of Glasgow from the synthetically created new image. If Bella, a woman without a past, is a surgical fabrication, then she too presents this synthetic quality the worker city saw in Glasgow's transformed identity. Godwin also invents Bella's past and history, stating that she's a distant niece whose parents died in a railway accident, a disaster where she sustained a concussion causing total amnesia. Godwin's new identity for Bella further exposes a power imbalance between them, as he asserts himself as the creator of her new identity and author of her history. This was a major area of contention too from the workers' side, who felt that the working class history of Glasgow was being rewritten, erasing the realities of the city's inhabitants. Although my analysis today has predominantly focused on the Workers' City critique of the Cultural City Award, it's important to state that the award did in fact allow Glasgow to transform its negative outward image and has since been adopted as the blueprint for post-industrial cities to regenerate through culture. In the novel, as Bella becomes a successful independent socialist after being transformed, there is space to investigate Glasgow in the same light, which I plan to do in future. But as we've learned today, transformation is a process which involves disappearance, and in 1990, the working classes bore the brunt of the city's regeneration. In many ways, Bella's search for her past reflects the workers' city group's plea for working class history to be acknowledged within the cultural year. Bella believes she is only half a woman without her past, as her psychological makeup differs from the physical body that represents it. Through the same lens, we can view Glasgow of the 1990, projecting a renewed cultural identity in the same physical city with little acknowledgement of its past. Therefore, when Bella views herself as only half a woman without her past, Glasgow too could be considered only half a city. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Lauren, for this very interesting interpretation and new interpretation of Poor Things. You know, just when you think that everybody has that everything has been said about Poor Things, then you come up with this very interesting presentation. So I'd like to, Kirsten, did you have a look at the chat? Do we have any questions? Does anyone want to ask a question to either Sorcha or Lauren about their presentations? Maybe I can start because, you know, with the, just to bring the film, the adaptation into what you're saying, when it came out, Sorcha, I think that I know that you did a lot of events on Poor Things and on the film, and can you maybe share with us the comments that you heard about the adaptation, or what you thought about the adaptation as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the positive spin would be it is a creative interpretation of Alasdair Gray's novel, and bearing in mind what we've been talking about, and Alasdair's approach being rooted in the practice of others. And I think that's partly why when he met Yorgos Lanthimos, he was really excited by the potential of what he could do with it. So I think he recognised Lanthimos as being quite a unique creative, and what he could bring in terms of revisioning and reimagining and transforming that book would be something that would that excited him, and that's why he you know, gave him quite a lot of creative control. He did sign over the rights, which is something that he hadn't really done previously. So that in itself probably showed a degree of faith and support and what might come from it. But of course, as Lauren had said, you know, Glasgow and Gray are inextricably linked, and what that novel does is play around with the layering of the social and political history of place and of Glasgow in particular. So the nuances and the different layers come through in the book in different ways, and you know, particularly thinking about the notes historical and critical as well. So to have completely erased that, I mean, people asked a lot, what do you think Alasdair Gray would have thought, which I didn't want to answer because I would never want to speak for Alasdair Gray. But I think if you spend your life trying to create an imaginative and celebrate the interwoven histories and the nuanced histories within the city, I think that erasure would have been something that he would have found difficult to take. And also, so there's one thing around that. There's also, I mean, watching the film in Glasgow was maybe a different experience from other places too. I think also the first 3 times I watched it with Rog Glass, Gray's biographer, sitting next to me. On the second occasion, we read the book at the same time as watching the film. So it felt like a very kind of rich experience of looking and listening, and also then trying to make map onto the text itself too. But it was kind of wonderful to be in a Glaswegian audience, laughing, sometimes having a sharp intake of breath on occasions, but it felt quite participatory, the experience of watching the film in that community. But I think the main negativity within the press in Scotland definitely was the erasure of Glasgow, and I guess to make the case that another version could be made within the city, but also Lauren had sort of picked up to, it's not just showing Glasgow as a place in which that novel's cited, but it's also the impact that something like that would have on the local creative economy too, in terms of working with a local cast and crew, and the whole investment then in supporting creative practice within the city and within the wider country is something that obviously would have been wonderful to have happened as well. But equally, the trade-off is that it shows the universality of many of Gray's text as well, and of course the increased readership that has come as a result of Alasdair, of the film, and people being drawn back to then the book. And hopefully to picking up texts beyond Poor Things, and hopefully to exploring writers beyond Alasdair Gray as well.
Lauren, would you like to say anything about that, about the film? Because I suppose that you also have your own opinion, especially in the light of what you've just said about this intimate connection between the novel and the history of Glasgow, which you managed to show to us very convincingly.
Yeah, I mean, I loved the film. I thought it was kind of bonkers, just like the novel. I think it kind of captured that spirit pretty well. It's disappointing, and it's always disappointing when any kind of Scottish literature that could turn into a film is kind of Scotland or Glasgow is then erased from that story. Like we don't have that many depictions on screen, one of which is Shrek.
Shrek?
So, yeah, just like Scottish characters that you find on the TV. So this would have been a nice opportunity to kind of, as Sorcha says, have Scottish actors set it in Scotland. But I did enjoy the film, and I think, he had the creative license to do what he wanted with it. But yeah, a bit of a shame.
Yeah, can I just, and then Kirsten, you can come in. In my introduction, I said we wanted to look at the internationalization of Scottish literature as well. That's one of the things that Corey and Kirsten and I are interested in as well. Not just Scottish literature, how can I say, purely Scottish context, because now, it's not exactly the same thing. We've got Scottish literature courses in French universities, in Swiss universities, in universities all over, in Italy, and in all over Europe. So, and there's also the internationalization of authors. So maybe such a film would be an example of internationalization of Gray himself, although you'd have to I had a look at the reception in France. You'd have to think of how it goes. And I remember, you're too young to remember, Lauren, but maybe some people in the audience will remember when Braveheart came out. Yeah. Braveheart is a completely different thing when you look at it from a different country. And there was this French actress, Sophie Marceau, who was in Braveheart, and she came on French TV. It was told me by a friend, told me that, because I didn't see it, but she came on French TV and to be interviewed about Braveheart, and she said, well, yes, it's a great movie, and it taught me a lot about the history of Ireland. And then I look at the reception. It's not just a story out of the blue like this, but I look at the reception of the film in France. I look at papers and the main French papers, and I learn, because there's something that I didn't know about Poor Things, that it was the product of how did they put it? Irish, British, American. It's an Irish, British, American film.
Yeah, one of the production companies is
Yeah,
pretty
yeah, of course.
successful. Yeah, based in Ireland.
Of course, that's the reason
Mhm,
why. But you know,
mhm,
seen from a foreign perspective, then what you get is that,
mhm,
oh, okay, it's all about Ireland, Britain.
mhm.
People don't think of, when they think from France, when you tell them Britain, they think England. So the only place that's actually missing is the place that the book was written in.
Yeah, I know. I find it interesting to reflect on it again now with the more recent adaptation of Amy Liptrop's The Outrun, and thinking
Mhm.
about how, her being so kind of central to the reimagining of that from a book into the adaptation that we see on the screen, and also how so much of it was obviously using kind of cast and crew from Scotland, from Orkney as well, and that rootedness back to place. It feels like a really sympathetic and nice way to take a text and to think through how to meaningfully connect that to place and to involve others within that process. Yeah.
Kirsten?
Thanks to both of you for your papers, and thanks to Lauren for citing me at the start of that. I think what struck me about Lauren's paper, following up on what we've been saying about the film, it's I love the film as well. I mean, I think it reminded me how crazy the Bella section of the novel is, because I've read it so often, it kind of made me see it again for the first time. But what I missed almost more than Glasgow was the allegory that's there in the novel. And what Lauren's paper shows is that we can read Bella in different ways. I read her one way, you're reading her out of that as Glasgow. And what I've always felt about Poor Things is that it's many things to different people. Now, maybe people are getting that out of the film, I'm not sure, but I felt that I've had this is unscientific, many informal chats with people who'd never read the book, people completely outside the Scotland and the Scottish lit circle. And when I say, oh, well, there's this Bella Caledonia idea, and so we can read her allegorically, they say, oh, I need to go back and think about that again. It makes more sense to me. Whether you read her as Scotland or as Glasgow, or I'm sure there are many other ways to read her. But I felt that the film kind of emptied out the allegorical dimension. Possibly, I don't know, viewers of the film in the audience did find an allegory in it, and I'd be interested to know. But I think Lauren's paper really reminded me of that element. I'd be okay with Glasgow not being in it if I could find what the alternative allegory was, but I'm not sure I found it.
Duncan?
Hi. Yeah, first of all, thanks for two great papers. If I may, because I've been thinking a lot about the film recently. I also loved it, but it kind of struck me going back to reread the Alasdair Gray's own script, which I first encountered back in 2002, I think, when I was on the Scottish Screen Lottery panel, and that was the second time that it had been given money, and it's a very interesting script because I mean, the whole thing about adaptation studies is forget about fidelity, but that script, and for maybe obvious reasons, it was Alasdair's own script, that the fidelity is extraordinary in terms of there's things you have to do to turn a 350-page book or however it is into. Although actually the script's still quite on the long side, but to turn something that would be maybe a 2-hour, 2.5-hour movie, you have to miss things out. But in terms of the stuff that I think from a sort of why do we love the book? Well, most of these elements are in the film. Although interestingly enough, I do think when you get rid of the idea of the editor and you also kind of truncate the letter into effectively just a wee bit of a spiel at the end with one scene that's kind of shown twice, which is the death of Godwin Baxter. It's kind of fascinating, but in some ways you kind of have to put it all to one side. And I think ultimately what I thought was interesting about Lanthimos's film is it was Lanthimos's film and it was Emma Stone's film. And the fact that it was built, well, the fact that it focused on, you know, one story rather than, if you like, a contested story, in a way that mainstream cinema does, because in many ways it's a mainstream film that's given the Lanthimos kind of, you know, sort of bonkers sort of thing, as Lauren put it, which is why I think Lanthimos is such an interesting director. He can somehow manage to, you know, kind of make films on fairly big budgets now, that on one hand are mainstream, on the other hand are kind of quite challenging and do things differently. But I kind of felt increasingly how hard or even impossible it would have maybe been to have made a satisfying, you know, Scottish version, given the constraints that you have in trying to make a film in Scotland, even now. And Ian Brown, you know, spent more than 10 years trying to raise the finance for the Scottish version, which was going to have Bobby Carlyle in it. It was going to have Helena Bonham Carter in it, Jim Broadbent, you know, a very different kind of cast. And one where, if you like, the realism and the fantasy kind of also were in there. Whereas I think Lanthimos is like, oh, let's just make the whole thing a phantasmagoria, was kind of like probably better than trying to replicate something that Alasdair Gray did supremely well in pretty much all of his work. And then you just end up with something that feels like it's paying lip service, but is just inferior, as opposed to something that's different. And I think for me, that was the thing that did it in. But I would love to point more people in the direction of the script, because the version that's in a Gray playbook is pretty much the final version. I think I went back to the archive and had a look at what's in the library, and you see the various versions, but actually even the first draft's fairly close to what the very end is. There's a lot of tinkering with the framing device and what's said at the end and all of this. But yeah, so sorry, I'm rambling a bit, but I think the script itself is something that is of great value, and thinking about, could that potentially form the basis of something, or I mean, I'd love to see an animated version of that script, I think, because in a way, it just brings the script to life rather than necessarily imposes actors and sets and all that kind of onto it.
Thanks for that, Duncan. It just made me think, I don't know if you've seen the Lanark script that he made too, which reads a bit like a storyboard. When you talk about the kind of animated version, I think there's real scope to think about his work and maybe explore some of those sort of fantastical kind of elements and root it in kind of realist or other depictions of the city that isn't maybe constrained to a more filmic version. The animative quality of that could really lend something different to it as well. You need to come and visit. We've got another version of the Poor Thing script that you're talking about here with yet more annotations to it as well. So yeah, need to show you that when you come and visit as well.
I would love to, yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Do we have time for a quick question before we have to thank Lauren and Sorcha? Just one of the things that just a quick reaction to what you were saying, Duncan. You know, how hard it's going to be to come up with a satisfying Scottish version. I think that one of the challenges, and that's why I think everyone or a lot of people love the film, you know, there's very few bad reviews in the French press, for example. But that's one of the things that happened. The thing that happened is that they really don't know, for most of them, that it's an adaptation of a novel by a Scottish writer. So all it is about is, oh, this is a sexual liberation of a character, and you know, it's also crude, and it's a feminist tale. But what you were saying made me think of, it's just such a complex, and you know, Lauren's presentation, Sorcha's presentation made us not realize, because we know it, but we just remembered that when we were listening to you, that it's such a complex novel, that you can enter the novel through such a variety of angles that it would be difficult to make it a satisfying version, full stop, you know, not even a satisfying Scottish version of the novel. So that's why maybe we can all agree. Carla, you want to say something about that?
Oh dear. Right. Well, thanks very much. It's incidentally, I've just started teaching Poor Things down here. which is an interesting experience. They just don't know where Glasgow is, but that's students today. So, that's a sort of starting point. No, just a final, I enjoyed everything, and thank you so much, actually. A bit of a challenge over a provocation, but isn't that what literature is about? When a literary text crosses borders, something happens, and that's the whole point, actually, of translations, adaptations, and different countries and different, readers will bring something new to that book that perhaps no one has thought of, or again, a different interpretation. I mean, think of Shakespeare, has been obsessively restaged all over the world, and no one is complaining if suddenly, Prosper is black and Caliban is white, and, all the reversals, appropriations, and adaptations that happen. That to me is a sign of health of Scottish literature, even though, yes, obviously, as a Scottish literary studies, I was also a little bit sad not to be Glasgow there, and the Glasgow girl, that's the other thing. So I was personally quite sad not, to see that Glasgow was not there. But he made choices, and I think the final outcome is actually brilliant in many ways. It was very successful in Italy, as far as I see, and reviewers were very positive, and not all of them acknowledged, actually, that it was based on Alasdair Gray's book. But yeah, okay. But still, some did. But on the whole, I think it is interesting. And yes, the fact that perhaps it's not presented as a quintessentially Scottish work is not entirely negative. I don't know. Just a final.
Yeah, in France, I don't think I saw a review that said that it was an adaptation from a book by a Scottish writer. When Gray was mentioned, but I didn't read all of the reviews, obviously, but I skimmed through quite a lot, and it was all whenever he was mentioned, it was only a writer and the name. So the whole Scottish thing is completely evacuated. We have time for one quick question from Lola, who wanted to say something. Yes.
Thank you for everything. I just wanted to say that, I came to this webinar because, Kirsten is currently following me regarding my memoir. I'm writing about the movie specifically. And one thing that I encountered that may add to the discussion whether the story should be embedded specifically in Glasgow or not is that when I come across readings about Lanthimos' filmography, which has not been really discussed so far, is that he has basically three phases. He's a Greek producer who happened to be quite linked to the weird Greek wave movement, but he tried to stay away from it. And when he reached, let's say, international recognition with The Lobster first, then Dogtooth, and as well as The Favourite, where with The Favourite he reached like mainstream cinema. It's very interesting because he tends to take many tales that could be embedded in a very specific socio-political context and made them as if the more important part for him in his work is power dynamics. So the decision to extract it from its, Scottish, I say, nationality and side, etc., may be interesting in terms of what was the main focus for Lanthimos. And it's all about power dynamics, sexuality especially. So this is why we have critical reception that mostly discusses sexuality. But yeah, that was just a small addition to that.
Thank you. Well, look, this is the end of our session together. So I would just like to finish off by thanking Sorcha and Lauren very much again for really stimulating for two very stimulating presentations on Gray. You make us want to come to the archive again and look at all your material. So thank you for your interpretations as well, which were really great. This will be this has been recorded, so there'll be a recording available if you've missed something and you'd like to watch it again. Thank you again to our speakers, and remember, this is a series. So in March we'll be talking again. We'll be talking about a different topic, but the seminar goes on. Thank you again. Bye, everyone. Thank you, Sorcha. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, everyone, for coming.